Hello, songwriters. This week, we're talking about working with a band. This one is a little bit of a deviation from working on songwriting skills, but I feel like this is an important lesson to get into because most songwriters at some point are going to end up working with a band, whether that is joining a band or starting their own. And there are a lot of things that I have seen students struggle with, that I have struggled with when I was going through this process, that I feel like getting songwriters a basic understanding of these concepts is going to make it so you can have more successful bands and ultimately share your music better. So let's go ahead and go into the goals for this. We are going to go through a band planning checklist that I've written up, and we're going to go through that point by point and talk through each of those. Through that, I'm also just going to talk about basic tips for getting your band organized and started to make music. So the overarching idea of this video is that good communication is everything when it comes to working with other musicians. And this goes for other things too, obviously, but the better you learn how to communicate, the fewer frustrations you're going to run into, there's going to be less miscommunication, you're going to be more productive, and ultimately in a band, you're going to make more music, which is the entire goal. So a few things to think about before we start this checklist of putting our band together is to think about whether we are ready for a band. So I want you to think about, are you prepared, right? Can you perform at a decent level? Can you play the songs? Are you prepared to share them with other people and talk about them in a mature way? It's okay if the answer is no. If you're writing really personal songs and the idea of sharing them with other musicians freaks you out, that's fine. And that's a good sign that maybe you don't want to work with a band. And that can be a fine route to go down. But take a second for some introspection and think, am I ready to share these songs? Can I play them at a decent level? Can I communicate my thoughts well enough to work with other people? And take a second also to think about, what are your goals for working with a band? Are you looking for a backing band to play your songs, to play the parts that you are telling them to play? Or are you looking for musical collaborators? And this is important when you're setting these up because you're going to approach those conversations differently. So here is the band planning checklist, and we're going to go through this point by point, and hopefully most of this is pretty straightforward. All of these are just good things that you want to think about with your band members. Have the discussion early because it is so much better to get everybody on the same page at the start of a project than have an issue come up a few weeks down the road, a few months down the road, and it becomes a much bigger issue. So if you go through this list early with your band, you're going to save some conflict down the road. Let's start with this. So we're starting with decision making, and the big one is, who is making the band decisions? Is it just the band leader? And this would be kind of the case if you are a songwriter that just wanted musicians to play your songs exactly how you write them. It could be okay to say, well, I am writing all the songs, I am leading the band, I make the decisions. If you're working with a band more as collaborators, well, you want to give them some choice in band decisions as well. So you could either choose that we can work off a majority vote, or you could say that it has to be unanimous, right? But you just have to agree on that. How is songwriting credit split? And this matters if songs do start being really successful. Money is going to be split up based on who has the songwriting credit. I stole this template from a band that I worked with. They said basically, if you are an instrumentalist and you wrote your part, that is worth 10% of the credit. So everybody that wrote their part gets 10%. Then, of the percentage left over, that is split between the lyricist and the composer. So if you wrote the lyrics, you get half of what is left. If you're the composer, you get the other half. And people could double dip, right? If I wrote the guitar part and the lyrics, I would combine both of those together to figure out my split. So hopefully that process isn't too complex, but I do recommend just thinking through this or laying down the framework. So if you have to retroactively go back and be like, who has what percentage of the song, you can do that. Let's go into musical style. What genre is the band focusing on? And notice that I only gave you 2 blocks. It can be very tempting to say, we want to focus on metal and funk and rap and pop and folk. And we're going to be this great musical amalgamation of every single one of those. Maybe if you find a way to fuse those things into one cohesive form down the road, fantastic. Please send it to me. I would love to hear it. But I think when you're starting, you want to narrow your scope a little bit. Just focus on the 2 that are most important to you. Are we pop punk? Are we folk rock? that is going to be a better starting point than if everybody has this really broad idea of where we're starting. And similarly, what bands are the main influences? Let's pick 3. If you have this list of 100 musicians that you want to pull influence from, that can be good and that can be helpful to you, but it's not going to be an understandable way if someone is new to the band and they're looking to become acquainted with the style that the band is playing. You should be able to hand them just a few artists to go look at and for them to understand what's going on. Obviously, as the band matures, it can get outside of these basic influences. You can add more. But again, we're thinking starting steps. So keep it simple, pick 3. Early goals. So in the early goals, I think this is really good that you want to pick stuff that's tangible. I think if you asked a lot of bands, what's your goal to start? They would say, we want to do a world tour. We want to make a platinum album. Those are fantastic long-term goals, but there's a lot of sub-goals that you have to reach before you get to that point. So think small. What are we doing in 2 months? Maybe it's we want to have our 30-minute set complete and we want to have a show booked. That's probably doable depending on your level of experience. What's our 6-month goal? Okay, maybe we want to record an EP and we want to have played 3 shows. That's a pretty good goal. You can work towards that in meaningful ways. If you set your first goal as a world tour, it can be so hard to even tell, like, what are the steps to go from here to a world tour? So try to shrink those down and say, what are our first steps, right? I'm not saying abandon those 5 years, 10 years down the road goals. Those are great to have as well. But a lot of times, these smaller goals are what get overlooked. Similarly, you should have a set planned. There's 9 blocks here. I think a 9-song set should be about 30 minutes. That's great for a new band to have. And this is also important for if you are bringing in new members. The 9 songs is something that people should really be able to wrap their heads around and start practicing in a meaningful way. And you notice down at the bottom, you have this chart that should be found in this chart folder. Definitely set up a folder where everybody can find the charts, find the recordings you're working from. Even if these aren't all originals and some are covers, it's good to have a chart just so there's a shared understanding of how you guys are interpreting the song. So keep that organized and you're going to see everybody gets ready and plays better much faster. Okay, we're halfway through. So member changes. And this is a tough one. No one wants to talk about what a member change looks like, especially at the beginning of the band, because everybody's excited and we want to work together and it's great right now. But if you can set the framework of how member changes happen, you're going to save a lot of conflict down the line. And this is one of my tips, that member changes will happen. Regardless if you like a person or not, regardless if they are a good musician or not, things happen. Schedules change, people move. Sometimes musically they could be a great musician, but they're just not the right fit, and that's okay. It's better to have the awkward conversation, to ask someone to leave or to warn them that something's not working, than to leave someone that's not a good fit in the band and it'll drag the whole band down. Similarly, it's also important to talk about how do we add new members to this band. You don't want someone to be like, hey, I invited my buddy to play keys. They're in the band now, right? That can also kind of mess up a band. So these are some points that you lay out the audition process. They learn a number of songs. Maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3 songs from the set, right? You jam with them. Everybody takes a vote. That's a good audition process. It's simple, it's to the point, it's easily understandable, but it's so important to lay this down early. Similar with asking people to leave. You get a warning, you get 2 warnings, and then if it doesn't get better, we take a vote, we might ask you to leave, right? So it's not fun, but it is important that everybody understands this and agrees to this early in the organization of the band. All right, let's go to rehearsals. Where does the band rehearse? Right? You have to have a place to rehearse. You gotta figure that out. And when does the band rehearse? I would really recommend that early in the phases of your band that you are practicing weekly, especially when you're adding new things to the set, especially when you are getting used to playing with one another. I've been asked to join bands that just kind of schedule rehearsals whenever they feel like they need it. And those bands are always not playing at the level they would like to be. Weekly rehearsals do a huge amount of good, and I really recommend them. Money. Also, people don't want to talk about money early, but it's important to lay down the groundwork. A lot of arguments can be had about money. So I would recommend you go one of these two systems. Money made and expenses the band have are shared between everybody equally. So that means if we get paid for a gig, we split the money equally. But also, if the band needs to buy something, if the band needs to print albums or something, we all have to contribute equally to that. If you feel like asking the band for contributions is going to create some tension, another way you can do it is that if the band makes $200 from a gig, immediately a percentage of that goes to a band fund to cover future expenses, and then the rest is paid out. So you could say half of it goes to the band fund, half gets split up amongst the members. And then the last one here is outside communication. Who is in charge of venue and booking communication? This should be one person, right? You don't want to get in the situation where maybe two people share it and a venue needs a response and the one person thinks the other person responded, the other person thinks the other person responded, the venue doesn't get an answer back, no one's happy, it's bad. So it's good to just have one person to take that on. And who is in charge of social media accounts? This one is more okay if multiple people do it, but you do want to make sure someone is doing this and make sure that they're keeping on top of it and keeping things current. And down here, there is another one. Just for anything else that comes up during this conversation that your band wants to get down, put anything else you need down there. So this is not long, right? It's 2 pages. Some of it is heavy stuff, but it's all important stuff. And man, if you sit down in the first month of rehearsals with your band and say, hey guys, I think this has legs. I think this is going somewhere. Let's go ahead and just have this conversation right now, get it all down. It's going to help a lot down the road of just making sure everybody's on the same page so you can work to common goals, so you know the procedure for adding people, for removing people, for sharing money. Those are the things that cause fights. And if your band is not getting along, you're not playing music, you're not writing more music, you're not sharing your music. So I think this is a really important thing to work on as a skill that is adjacent to songwriting, is how do I get people to play my music in a way that is fun for them, fun for me, and hopefully fun for the audience as well. And I want to end right here, right? We talked about all of these things. It can seem really hard to get a band together, but I want to end that being in a band and working with other musicians is one of the best things you can do for your songwriting and your musicianship, and it is so much worth the work. So don't be psyched out by this whole checklist we just went through. I cannot recommend highly enough being in a band, working with other people, talking about your musical ideas, working on music together. It's a phenomenal experience. It'll make you so much better, and it should be a ton of fun. I'll end the video here. I hope this was helpful for everybody, and I'll see you guys next week.